It's time to experience the O on the Original Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Mark Maraday.
Original Sports Podcast. Hey, this is Mark Maraday, and I'd like to welcome our guest today. It's Randy Karraker from 101 ESPN in St. Louis. Randy, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm real excited to talk some St. Louis sports with you. I hear you are a bank of knowledge, not just about sports, but I hear some friends who live out in the St. Louis area. You really have a lot of knowledge there. Actually, a couple of different people have told me about your little trivia stuff that you bring to the table all the time. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, we started that. Our station started in 2009, and about 10 years ago, we started what was then, I was doing afternoon drive. It was called the 4 o'clock fight. And the way it's set up is that we have 4 questions. The listener gets 3 multiple choice answers for each one, and I don't get multiple choice answers. And I usually win about 90% of the time. Our producer does a great job of developing questions that are not too easy for me, but not too difficult for the listener. And we have a lot of fun. It's become a really popular segment.
Lifelong sports fan. Did you play sports growing up?
No, actually, I as a kid, my very first football practice in 8th grade, I got hit in the back with a helmet, and I found out that I was missing part of my vertebrae in my back, and I wanted to be around sports. And I was actually, it was at that time that I decided, you know what, if I'm not going to be able to play sports, I better find something to do in sports. And I decided at that age to become a broadcaster. And I was really lucky. My mom bought subscriptions to both of the St. Louis newspapers. I had subscriptions to the Sporting News, which at the time was based here in St. Louis, and Sport Magazine and Inside Sports. Back in the 70s, you had a million different sports magazines, and I had access to all of them. So I read them every week, and that's how I developed my sports knowledge.
Did you write in the school newspaper, sports, or anything like that?
I did, yeah. I was I did some writing just for everything, just so that I could improve my writing. But yeah, I was focused in on sports. And actually, I found out last year, I still have some teachers and assistant principals that are around town. And I ran into one of my assistant principals who said there was a history teacher who complained to him about me sitting in the back of the room talking sports. He said, what am I going to do with this kid? And the assistant principal said, oh, don't worry about it. He's going to wind up doing that anyway. So just let him sit back there and talk and just try to get him through. And they did. And here I am.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a blessing that happened to you, right?
Right. No doubt.
Where'd you go to college at?
I went to Lindenwood College. It was then Lindenwood College right here in the St. Louis area in St. Charles, Missouri. Now it's Lindenwood University. But we've had a lot of local sportscasters come out of there. Greg Amsinger, the lead anchor for MLB Network, is a Lindenwood guy. Dan McLaughlin, the voice of the Cardinals, is a Lindenwood guy. The people that do the pre and post game for the Blues and the Cardinals here in town are from Lindenwood. So it's a pretty good little broadcasting institution right here on the outskirts of St. Louis.
That's awesome. Was there one particular event that like kind of set you off with sports? Is there something that happened that you saw as a kid that you were like, oh man, I want to go that route?
You know what really caused me to become a sports fan? And my dad was a huge sports fan, and he was a huge fan of the Green Bay Packers. And for whatever reason, I was a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, who are obviously the arch rival of the Packers. Those two don't like each other, but I liked the Vikings at the time. I liked Fran Tarkenton, and I liked that team, and they won a lot. But the one I really remember, I was a Johnny Unitas fan, and I remember the first football game I really remember watching was Super Bowl III, when Joe Namath had the guarantee and beat the Colts. And I was a Johnny Unitas fan that day, and I think that's the first time I ever sat through an entire football game. And I think that really was what set me on my path to becoming a big sports fan.
When I was growing up, it's funny you should mention the Minnesota Vikings. You know, I grew up in the Steelers, the 70s Steelers. Mm-hmm. That's when I grew up. And lived in the Pittsburgh area, and everybody was a Steeler fan, obviously, because all those years they were horrendous, except for my best friend, and he was a Minnesota Vikings fan. Fran Tarkenton, Chuck Foreman, the whole 9 yards. And I think he just, because the Steelers played them in that first Super Bowl, I think he just wanted to antagonize us. But,
sure.
That's funny you say that. Well, let's stay with football a little bit. I hear you are along the way, you were a little bit upset. The Rams skated out of town on you. Did you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was actually a lot upset. And there's a lawsuit going on here that the people in St. Louis, the lawyers that are in charge of it, feel pretty good about, because the NFL, when Al Davis moved from Oakland to Los Angeles in the 80s, they initiated a hard and fast set of guidelines that were actually recommended to them by the Senate. They went to the Senate and said, look, how can we set this up so that we don't lose our antitrust exemption from you? And so the Senate suggested these rules, and the NFL did not abide by them. Now, until the last weeks of the Rams' existence in St. Louis, I thought the league would do the right thing. The league encouraged St. Louis to build a new stadium. They encouraged fans to keep buying tickets. They encouraged people to keep buying Rams merchandise. And as it turns out, from the time Stan Kroenke bought the franchise in 2010, got sole ownership of the franchise, there was really no chance that that franchise was going to stay in St. Louis. Yet Roger Goodell in the league kept encouraging St. Louis to try. St. Louis spent $17 million on building up an actionable stadium plan. The league's complaint with St. Louis history was that they didn't have an adequate stadium. And I think what happened was they didn't think there was any way, the league didn't think there was any way that the St. Louis Stadium Task Force that was put together by then Governor Jay Nixon would be able to build an actionable plan within a year. And they did. And it kind of became, well, we're the dog that caught the tail or caught the rabbit. What do we do now? Yeah. And so what they did was they kept moving the goalposts. They told St. Louis that they could borrow $300 million in the G4 fund. And then when the stadium came to fruition, they said, oh no, our policy is that we only give $200 million. They told St. Louis that the stadium was fine. Even Eric Grubman said that what Dave Peacock and Bob Blitz, the stadium task force people, were doing, they said that he said it was fine, but then once they reached that point where they were going to vote, then all of a sudden the league was worried about the financing for the stadium. It was financing that the league recommended. And so it really was a disingenuous move on the part of the league. It really makes them look like a cartel or a gang. And a lot of people in St. Louis lost any respect that they had for the NFL because they were just so dishonest. If they would have just said, hey, we want to get back to the number 2 market, this is business, I think St. Louis people would have said, we get it. But for St. Louis to be led along like it was, and then for the league to feign that they actually did abide by their guidelines is pretty ridiculous. And so next January, there will be a lawsuit that starts here in St. Louis, in the city of St. Louis. And there hasn't been a number that has been gleaned yet by the people that are filing the lawsuit, but it'll be north of $3 billion that wow. St. Louis will be asking for. And it'll be from a city of St. Louis jury. It's going to be really interesting.
Have you maintained your passion for the Rams, or are you like, nah, I'm going to go back to Minnesota?
Well, my passion is that I hate them. My favorite team every week is the team that plays the Rams. Okay. And I think a lot of us here in St. Louis, a lot of people just won't watch the league at all. They're just fed up. I watch. It's my job to know sports and know what's going on. I'm really surprised that the league got the TV contracts that they did, and that's a testament to their brilliance. But no, I don't watch the league like I did. I spent 40 years of my life during the fall waking up pretty much every morning, not just Sunday mornings, but pretty much every morning planning for my Sundays. And then when I went to bed on Sunday, I was either happy that my team won or sad that they lost. And I get up on Monday and start planning for the next week. I haven't seen a kickoff for an NFL game since the Rams left St. Louis.
Wow, that's interesting. Would you like to see a team come back? If they came to St. Louis, would you be part of the group that spearheaded bringing a team back there?
I would be interested in a team, and I know there are a lot of St. Louisans that would be interested in a team. But in terms of doing business with any league entity, no, I would never do that. I would never buy tickets. I would never buy their gear again. They're not honorable business people that you really want to be in business with. And by the way, the people that they ticked off here in St. Louis, Edward Jones is one of the biggest companies in town. They had the stadium rights. Enterprise is one of the biggest companies in town, and they were going to buy the naming rights for a new stadium. Worldwide Technology is a $6 million a year business here in town that they ticked off. Pretty much every big corporation in town, the Rams lied to on the way out the door. So there's not any appetite on the part of the corporate sector here in St. Louis or the government sector that tried to get the stadium built to do any business with the NFL. And St. Louis is all in on MLS now. Those big companies that I just referenced, Emerson, or not Emerson, but Enterprise rather, is going to be the primary owner of our new MLS franchise. A stadium is going up that the government is helping build. So St. Louis is kind of gearing itself towards soccer joining football, or rather baseball and hockey.
That's interesting you mentioned that about the NFL, because I've long had that feeling just going forward. Like I said, I've been a Steeler fan since I was a little kid in the early 70s. And I just see the league dictating towards the money, the big money, the teams that want to spend the big money. They're talking the new contract. I'm waiting to hear what the new contract's actually going to be with DirecTV, if DirecTV is going to get it. I have a funny feeling that Amazon is going to steal that whole contract, not just that Thursday night game. I think they're going to end up getting the whole thing. I mean, he's got the money to do it. And quite frankly, I mean, why wouldn't he?
And from a league perspective, I think there should be a point at which they openly care about fans and fans' ability to consume their product. And that would be counter to what we're talking about. If you force people to have Amazon Prime so that they can watch out of market or Thursday night football games, it does become all about the money. And hey, that's what business is. They're about profitability. And those 32 owners, we know they're all about money. In St. Louis, we know more than most. But as Mark Cuban said, at some point, hogs get slaughtered. And I do think in this instance, maybe the NFL is leaning too far to the revenue side rather than caring about the people that actually they need to support their business.
I'd have to agree with Mark Cuban and exactly what you said 100%. So let's look at a sport that really is trying to do some things and get themselves on the map, the NHL. Getting that TV contract with ESPN, I think, is a huge move for them. Now they're part of the Disney family, the ABC family, the whole 9 yards. What's going on with the Blues? Are the Blues going to be able to compete with Vegas? Are the Blues going to be able to compete with Colorado out there?
That's a great question, Mark. The Blues have been talking in the last couple of games after their last several losses about their compete level. And I can never figure that out, how a professional sports team doesn't have the compete level necessary, especially when they're a champion just 2 years removed. They shouldn't have any questions about their compete level. They're getting their players back. They were missing their best player, Vladimir Tarasenko, for most of the season. They lost Robert Thomas, their best young player. Jaden Schwartz is a guy, and he's not a big name, but Jaden Schwartz over the last 4 years, the Blues have played .650 hockey when he's in the lineup, about .437 hockey when he's not in the lineup. He's an engine to the team. So they're getting these guys back. My question is, do they have the gumption, the competitive desire to compete with those teams? And that's all they're going to see once we turn the calendar. And by the way, I guess starting now, it's going to be Minnesota, it's going to be Colorado, it's going to be Vegas. It's going to be the 3 teams ahead of the Blues in the West Division, this year's West Division, that they're playing only those teams. So I think they'll be able to make the playoffs, but I really do question mark whether or not they're going to be able to compete with Vegas and Colorado. I would not bet on them if the playoffs started today.
So besides needing to get a little juice in their step, a little motivation for whatever the reason, you know what, Randy, this always killed me. NHL shelf life for a coach is just maybe 3-4 years on average.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some guys who are sticking around a little bit longer because they have the players to get it done. But, generally speaking, 3 or 4 years. But what else is this team going to need? I mean, do they have a solid blue line? Because I think their blue line is, it's okay.
Yeah, well, one of their underrated losses last year, a little over a year ago, right as the pandemic was starting, they lost Jay Bouwmeester, and he was their best penalty killer. He was their best defensive defenseman. And throughout the course of the last couple of Olympics, when Canada had a 1-goal lead in a game late, they'd put Alex Pietrangelo and Jay Bouwmeester on the ice. The Blues pairing was the pairing for Canada at the end of Olympic or World Championship games. Well, Bouwmeester has to retire because of the heart issue.
Yes.
Pietrangelo leaves for Vegas as a free agent, and the Blues kind of have to start over defensively. So they are solid on the blue line. They're much more offensively and power play oriented now than they were, and they really don't have that shutdown defender. That's where they're really lacking right now, and especially because they're missing the guy who was supposed to assume that number one role, Colton Parayko. He's 26 years old. He's 6'5", 230, and he and Bouwmeester were the best defensive pairing in the playoffs a couple of years ago when the Blues won the Cup. But Parayko has a bad back, so he's been out. So the hallmark of the Blues, the size is missing on the blue line, and now they're really missing that shutdown guy. And I think they'll be better if and when they can get Colton Parayko back. But that's a question mark, as we know, backs can be kind of dicey.
Absolutely. Who's been a pleasant surprise for them this year then?
There have actually been several, and one of those is their backup goalie, Billy Husso. They lost Jake Allen, who was superb as a backup goalie last year and then in the Stanley Cup year. And Allen, because of salary cap reasons, was traded to Montreal. Husso, in his first two games, had a goals against of 7.01. And since then, he's gone 6-2-1 for the Blues. Goals against 285, 900 save percentage. And of the two regulation losses, one of them was a 1-goal loss. So he's given the Blues a chance to win pretty much every single time he's been out there. And then the other one is Justin Falcon. People from the Eastern Conference remember him from Carolina. Yes. He was a 3-time All-Star and just didn't play well for the Blues last year. And I really think the Blues acquired him as a proactive move because they kind of figured that Alex Pietrangelo wasn't going to stick around. Well, now that Falk is back getting regular minutes, playing the right side, last year he played the left, and he's a right defenseman all the way. He's played very well. And up until the last couple of weeks, he had to be in the Norris conversation. I don't know if he is now, but he played for the better part of the season among the best defensemen in the National Hockey League. So he's been a nice surprise too.
It's always been kind of amazing to me that the high level of a lot of hockey players, that they can't play either the right side or the left side as need be, especially your superstars. You see a lot of guys come in and they just cannot. I remember years ago as a Penguin fan, they brought in Jerome McGinley and they flipped him from one side to the other. Here's a guy who was a perennial All-Star and Olympian. He couldn't do it. He just was unproductive.
It's amazing how some guys have no trouble at all. Alexander, who just retired, could play any position on the ice. Here now, he tore his ACL the other night. But Oscar Sundqvist, who got traded here when the Penguins got Ryan Reeves, he'd become one of the Blues' best players. And you could plug him in left wing, right wing, center, first line through fourth. He's eminently adaptable. Blues have a second-year player, Jordan Kyrou, who they can move from right wing to left wing now. But if they try to move Jaden Schwartz, who's played for 8 years in the league, over to the right wing, he just can't do it. He's strictly a left wing. It is interesting how some guys have no trouble doing it and some guys it's impossible for them to do it.
You see them making any deals? I mean, the trading deadline is going to be looming here pretty soon in April. Do you see anybody getting moved on and looking to strengthen an area up?
It's interesting. The Blues have one guy that I think they could move, and that's Mike Hoffman. He has scored 20 goals a year for 6 straight years. He was with Ottawa and then Florida, and the Blues signed him as a free agent right before camp started with Tarasenko out. And because of the Blues cap situation, if Parayko and Tyler Bozak, a third-line center who makes $5 million, if those guys come back, the Blues are going to have to move a salary. And I think Mike Hoffman would be the logical one. And they might just take a draft pick if they could get somebody for Hoffman. But the only way they'll make a move is to shed salary cap space. They aren't going to be able to make a move to improve themselves because they were literally, when the season started, something like $500 under the salary cap.
Oh, Jesus. And you can't even barely bring another guy up from the minor leagues for that amount, No. I've seen that happen. I'm going to be curious, going back to what I said earlier about ESPN taking over the television rights. I'm going to be curious how much that impacts the salary cap going forward next year. I know that they're what, like 82 something nominal amount. It actually dropped a couple million, but I'm wondering if it's not going to be a sizable jump where teams won't have to make that decision going forward.
Yeah, and I would think they'll probably have the league will probably have a deal with NBC, and getting fans back in the stands is the key. For the Blues, most of their revenue, more than 50% of their revenue, is generated by gate sales. But I do think, Mark, that as we go along, I don't know how you are as in terms of a sports consumer, but ESPN is my go-to. I go to the ESPN right off the bat. I never go to NBC Sports Network. I think you can find the NHL on ESPN by accident and just sit back and tune in and say, oh, this is cool. But you're never going to go to MS or NBC Sports Network, and that's not going to exist anymore at the end of this year. But you're never going to, you have to seek out hockey now. That's my point. When it's on ESPN, you won't have to seek it out. You'll just find it. And I think that'll enhance the popularity of the sport. And I do think the sport right now is as good as it's been since the 80s when you had Gretzky and Hull and Lemieux and all those guys scoring all those points.
Sure. What do you think will enhance the not so average fan to make them a fan of the game? Because it seems that, one of the things you hear is, oh, people can't follow the puck. People don't understand the rules. What do you think is going to happen to grab those people and really draw them in? Because honestly, in my opinion, Randy, I think hockey is a better sport than football. It's faster. The guys are tougher. They're more resilient. They get banged up pretty good, and they just come right back out. How many times you see a guy get some teeth knocked out, go get stitched up, and he's on the ice for the next shift?
Yeah, and along with that, young people like action, and I'm with you. I like the sport better than football and baseball now too, because of the action. And I look at markets like Nashville and Vegas. They picked up the rules, and I think it's incumbent upon ESPN to try to get people to pick up the rules. And I think now, regardless of the screen that you're watching, whether it's a phone and the clarity and the HD on a phone is unbelievable, or whether it's an 85-inch big screen, I think the sport is televised so well and the quality of the TV product is so good. I think that argument about not being able to see the puck is a thing of the past. I get that from the days that we didn't have HD TV, but now I can, and I'm 58 years old and I don't have great vision, but I can watch a game on my phone with no problem at all.
Sure. I always tell people when they say, I like hockey, but I just can't get into it. I always tell them, you need to go to a game. It doesn't matter what kind of game you go to, whether it's, we live close. I live close to the Hershey Bears, and I take my son, who is a hockey player. He's 11. We go to the games all the time up there in Hershey. It's about an hour and 20-minute drive, but it's live hockey, and you really get sucked into the game once you go one time.
And I think that's why the NHL has succeeded at an extraordinary level as a regional sport, because they're filling up all their buildings and the TV ratings around the league are really good. It's just that, kind of like baseball is now, it's a regional sport. It's not a niche sport, but people around St. Louis like the Blues, people around Chicago like the Blackhawks, people around Pittsburgh like the Penguins. But it's not like the NFL where I can be walking down the street in St. Louis and I can see a guy wearing a Ben Roethlisberger or Patrick Mahomes jersey.
Sure.
And so it's not a national sport. And I don't think that they should foster any illusions of becoming a national sport. I think they're fine where they are. And if ESPN can take it to the next level from a financial perspective, then I think the league will do very, very well.
Do you like the way they put these divisions together this year? Because I think it's a meat grinder, man. I think it's just insane to watch you play within that division. That's it. It kind of defines where you're going to be heading out of that division.
And to me, the best playoffs in sports are the Stanley Cup playoffs. Absolutely. There's no greater tension. There's no greater point at which you're just completely frustrated or completely exhilarated than the Stanley Cup playoffs. And that's what this is like. Because of COVID, the Blues, Mark, actually had 7 consecutive games against the Coyotes. They had a 7-game series against the Coyotes. And at the end of it, they hated guys. And same thing with Vegas. Mark Stone of Vegas hit Tyler Bozak, concussed him early in the season. And Blues fans right now, they can't wait for the Blues to get back at Mark Stone. And that's just the way playoff hockey is. So I think it's been great to build some new rivalries, because the Blues never really had strong rivalries with the the Sharks they did because they played in a couple of Western Conference Finals against them, but nothing really strong against the Kings, and certainly nothing really strong against the Anaheim Ducks, who aren't that good right now. But this has kind of fostered some of that, and it's great. And I think even when we get back to normal divisions, some of these rivalries will continue.
Who would you say is the rival? I always kind of looked at Dallas as a rival to St. Louis when I watched hockey out west.
Yeah, it's St. Louis and Chicago. It's the Blues and the Blackhawks. It's the Cardinals and the Cubs. It was the Rams or the St. Louis football Cardinals against the Bears. We have a natural rivalry with Chicago. We hated the Red Wings when they were in our conference because Red Wings fans, they were insufferable and they'd take over the building and the team was really good. And they always seemed to find a way to win in the last minute. It was a very hateable team.
Yeah.
So St. Louis fans just despise the Red Wings, but the natural rivalry, and we don't have it this year, is with the Blackhawks. And hopefully now they hate the Blues as much as Blues fans hate them, since the Blues finally did win a Stanley Cup.
I'll be excited to watch the Stanley Cup playoffs. I agree with you. The only other sport that I think offers us the same kind of intensity is March Madness.
Yeah,
and I'm
no doubt.
saying that totally. So totally believe that.
And it's interesting because whether it's March Madness with our brackets or hockey, because like we talked about, it's a regional sport and you have your team, you just have such a great investment in your team. And not that you don't in football, but it's one and done in football. It's 1 week and you're out, and by the next Wednesday, unless you were jobbed by the officials, you get it. And baseball, you just don't have that level of intensity. It's just it's not an intense sport, as we know. And so that's why I'm with you that March Madness and the fact that you do have that one and done after working so hard to get to the tournament. And then obviously hockey. I think those are the two greatest postseasons.
Speaking of controversy, did you see what happened to the NHL official today, Tim Peel?
Yeah, Tim Peel's a St. Louis guy. He lives here in St. Louis. And we've known it for years as hockey fans that there are make good calls, but you can't say it. And you certainly can't get caught on mic saying, yeah, I wanted to make sure that I gave Nashville a penalty because he was going to even things up. And I think the league did the right thing. He was going to retire at the end of this year anyway. And the league did the right thing in preventing him from officiating any more games. You just can't have a guy that admits that he's on one side or the other on a particular call.
Especially on camera or on microphone or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Who would do that? Let's talk a little baseball. We're almost there, man. Not too much longer. We're playing some regular season baseball. The Cardinals, did they do enough this offseason to get themselves ready to make a championship run? Because that's a great organization. I as a Pittsburgh Pirate fan, I'm born and raised in Pittsburgh, obviously, but as a Pirate fan, I know where we'll be. I know where we've been for a long, long time. But I've always looked at the Cardinals as a model organization. Have they done enough this year?
Well, let me start with this, because as a Pirate fan, I feel for you because our markets are similar. We're similar in size. We saw when the Pirates were good 8 years ago that people would show up at the ballpark. There's no excuse that Bob Nutting can't take a cue from the ownership of the Cardinals and say, hey, we could do that. We could steal their plan and try to build a franchise the way they do. And the way the Cardinals do it is they develop young players and then they supplement them with veteran players. And the reason the Cardinals will be good this year is because they got a top 10 player in the game in Nolan Arenado in an unbelievable deal from Colorado. They gave up 5 prospects. One was a top 10 prospect, and they got $50 million to help pay down Arenado's contract. So now you have 2 guys that are in the top 4 in WAR in baseball in the last 5 years. Paul Goldschmidt at first, Arenado at third. They were already solid at shortstop, not spectacular, but Paul DeYoung hit 30 home runs a couple of years ago. There are questions about the productivity of their outfield, but they have a young kid named Dylan Carlson who's going to play in the outfield, a switch hitter who was a top 15 prospect in baseball, the Cardinals' top prospect for a couple of years. And then the hallmark for the Cardinals is their pitching. They have a superb bullpen. They've had some injuries in the spring in their starting rotation, but Jack Flaherty was considered a Cy Young candidate before last season, before the shutdown. He hasn't changed a bit. Adam Wayne right now has had 2 good, durable seasons, coming back at the age of 39, certainly a question mark. Carlos Martinez pitched him winter ball. He's been hurt for a couple of years, and they're hoping he comes back. But they have a ton of depth. They have 10 or 11 guys that are capable of giving them 4 or 5 innings at the major league level. And with the depth of their bullpen, I think that they should be pretty solid. And depending on what happens with the Cubs, and everybody around baseball seems to believe that they're going to tear that thing apart at the trade deadline and get rid of Chris Bryant and anybody else who might be a free agent. I don't think that the Reds can play with the Cardinals, and I'm interested to see if the Brewers have enough starting pitching depth to stick with the Cardinals. I would think that this division will come down to the Cardinals and the Brewers. So to answer your question in a long way, I think the acquisition of Arenado was enough. I don't think that if they got him that they would be set apart from those other teams, but I think Arenado does set them apart.
Will you miss Colton Wong, though? Because now you've kind of traded one side of the infield for another side, in my opinion.
Yeah, keep an eye on Tommy Edmond. He played third base last year and played a lot of third base the year before. Came up, though, as a middle infielder. He's got a ton of range. They don't think that he's far behind Wong defensively, and they think Edmond, a switch hitter, is actually superior offensively to Colton Wong. Colton Wong was normally a 310, 318 on-base percentage guy, and they think that Tommy Edmond can be a 330, 340 on-base percentage guy at the top of the lineup. And so I don't think there's going to be a dramatic drop-off there. I think he has a chance to be a pretty good second baseman. I'm intrigued to see how he does as a leadoff hitter. I have no worries at all about his defense, though.
Why do you think the Rockies had no problem parting with Arenado and giving you $50 million for 5 prospects? I always look at it from this perspective. They're prospects. There's a reason they haven't made it to the majors yet. They may not be valid major league players. But why do you think they had no problem moving on from Arenado?
I think at the top of the list is that they're just an inept organization. They just are not good. I had a relative that played in their organization. He said, it's interesting. They bought all this analytics equipment, but nobody in the organization knew how to use it. And he got traded from the Yankees to the Rockies, and the Yankees are all in. They spend more money on analytics than anybody. So he knew how to use it, and he was at Double-A showing his teammates how to use the analytics equipment. And then they had another kid come over from Washington that helped them out too. But then the Rockies gave Arenado this contract with an opt-out after 2021. And he's making $35 million a year. And their claim was, well, we didn't want him to opt out and get nothing for him, one of the top players in the game. He wasn't opting out at $35 million a year. It just wasn't going to happen. And I just don't think they have a really good grasp of A, how to put a team together to win, but B, how to treat the people and the players in their organization. I don't know if you saw the piece in The Athletic earlier this week, but last year during the season, they furloughed clubhouse assistants, people that shine shoes, people that do laundry, and they brought people down from the front office, full-time employees, to work those jobs of part-time clubhouse employees. They just don't seem to have an understanding of how to be a major league organization in Colorado. And I know that last year the Cardinals were interested in him, in Nolan, and the Rockies weren't prepared to do it. And my guess is that John Mozeliak was kind of like that pesky fantasy football or baseball general manager that calls you every day and says, okay, you ready to do a deal? Okay, you ready to do a deal? And finally, the Rockies cracked, and the Cardinals got what they wanted in addition to the $50 million. They didn't want to pay a guy $35 million a year. Sure. So to get the $50 million and bring it down to about $25 million a year for a player of that caliber is something that was important to them.
Do you think, and this is, this is an ongoing discussion, but do you think money should be more, should there be a ceiling you need to spend to? Should there be a salary cap on baseball?
It's interesting. In 1994, the players were offered a 50-50 revenue split. They were offered a salary cap, and they said, we will never accept a salary cap. If I'm a baseball player right now, first of all, their share of the revenue has gone down for 4 consecutive years. And by the way, has never gotten to 50%. So they should have taken that then. The players should want a cap so that there's a floor, because you have franchises now on opening day. The Pirates are going to make less than Garrett Cole and Giancarlo Stanton of the Yankees, a lot less than those two players together. Actually, the Pirates team will make less than Goldschmidt and Arenado. are making. There has to be a mechanism for owners like the Pittsburgh owner, like the former Marlins owner, to spend to a floor so that they aren't pocketing revenue sharing money. And the only way to get a floor is to get a cap. The problem is the players don't trust the owners. They don't trust the owners in regards to how much revenue they're making. But absolutely, I think the players would benefit from a cap if there were a floor included.
I know, speaking of the Pirates, I mean, I know for a fact, I read this in, I don't know, it might have been The Athletic or maybe something local, but there are 5 players who are going to make more this year, maybe 7 players, starting with like Trevor Bauer. He signed that 1-year deal for $40 million. The Pirates payroll is inflated at like $35 million for their 24-man roster or whatever they're carrying this year. I mean, Cleveland has the same thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
I was just amazed that these teams were willing to carry that kind of payroll and yet think that they're going to be competitive in the end.
Well, and the rough part of it for them is they think that they can tank like the Cubs did and like the Astros did successfully. But there are 2 problems there. Number one, you have so many teams trying to tank that only one team is going to get that top pick or one of the top 2 picks. So you kind of have to get lucky and to finish in last. And the other thing is, ultimately, the Padres are a team that tried to tank. It didn't work, so they go out and they sign Manny Machado for $300 million. They give Tatis $340 million. They go out and get Yu Darvish, who's making $25 million a year. They go get Blake Snell, who they're going to have to pay a bunch of money to. They're paying Will Myers a bunch of money. Even teams that try to tank, Philadelphia, another example, they go out and get Bryce Harper. They sign Real Muto. They sign Zach Wheeler, who's their second highest paid player. Tanking just doesn't work ordinarily. Even when Houston succeeded, they went out and got Justin Verlander. They went out and signed Josh Reddick. They go out and trade for Brian McCann. When the Cubs do it, they sign Lackey and they sign Hayward to the ridiculous deal. They sign John Lester to the ridiculous deal. So there's a certain place you can get to by tanking, but it's not going to get you over the top. And I think it's more difficult now. Talent evaluation is better. And like I said, only one team can finish in last. I don't think tanking makes any sense at all anymore. I think you should try hard to win.
I know I'm drawing a name for the second pitcher. I know Kumar Rocker is one of the guys who's slated to be the number 1 overall, but the other guy who pitches in the Vanderbilt organization is the number 2 or 1B or 1A, whatever you want to call him. He's lights out too. So I mean, you know, that's going to be a tough call for the number 1 pick this year. But you know, you're 2-3 years away and getting that guy to the majors once he figures out the major league game. You know, what's the value in it?
And if I have the number 1 pick, it's interesting, Mark, because I think when we were growing up, everybody said, "Man, I got to get that number 1 pitcher. I got to get that number 1 pitcher. I got to find him somewhere." I think it's harder to find a slugger now. When you look at the Dodgers, they go out and get Bauer and Price. They're able to trade for 2 number 1s. When Houston went over the top from the Pirates and they got Justin Verlander from the Tigers, the Cubs go get Lester and Lackey and Arrieta from Baltimore. It's easier to actually go out and get a starting pitcher now to put you over the top than it is to find a hitter. Cardinals can't develop a hitter. That's why they've had to trade for Goldschmidt and Arenado, because since they drafted Albert Pujols in 1999, they haven't been able to draft a hitter.
Speaking of Pujols, I read an article recently that talked about his age. Do you think he's really only 42, 44? Is that what it is? Or
yeah, I believe that he is, and it's 41. After 9/11, the federal government and Major League Baseball did a deep dive into player ages because they wanted to make sure that everybody that came into this country was legit. And there were 300 players in professional baseball that were investigated and found to be older than they said they were. And Albert wasn't one of those at that time. That's the only thing I really have to go on. And the other thing I would say is if he's significantly older, then he's even a better athlete than we give him credit for being, because he hasn't, until last year, he really hasn't been horrible. This is a guy, if he without steroids is hitting 35, 30 home runs at the age of 42 or 43, that's very impressive. Nope. Henry Aaron didn't do that. Bonds didn't do it without steroids. So if he's doing it and being tested for PEDs, he's one of the great athletes of our time.
Should Bonds be in the Hall of Fame? Should McGuire be in the Hall of Fame?
I think they should. I remember Ken Caminiti, the late Ken Caminiti, saying that 80% of major leaguers were taking steroids. And even if it was 50%, people say that those guys weren't playing on a level playing field. Well, if half the players in baseball, the top half, were all taking PEDs, then yes, it was a level playing field. Bob Costas, who's a St. Louis guy, makes the argument that Barry, the day he left Pittsburgh, if he would have retired, he would have been a Hall of Famer. And there's no doubt about that. So I think that he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think the big thing with people like Bonds, with McGwire, with Clemens, those are the three that we talk about most. When those guys were either using, McGwire has admitted, or allegedly using PEDs, there were no rules against it in baseball. No. It was not collectively bargained until 2004 that you could be punished for using steroids. Mark McGwire could have walked up to the plate on September 8th of 1998 when he was sitting on 61 home runs, tied with Roger Maris, and he could have turned to the home plate umpire and said, "I'm all jacked up on steroids." And there was nothing baseball could have done. There were no rules that were punishable. So if technically it's not cheating and the guys couldn't have been suspended for it, then why keep them out of the Hall of Fame?
Right.
Here, can I make one other point here?
Yeah, absolutely.
I refuse to believe that there aren't a half a dozen guys in the Hall of Fame that didn't use. And heck, there was speculation around Mike Piazza. There was speculation around Jeff Bagwell.
Yep.
There was speculation around Biggio. I don't know how a guy at 38, 39 years old starts to throw harder like Randy Johnson did. So there's a lot of guys that I think that could fairly be suspected that are already in the Hall of Fame.
Would you share a little bit about that experience then, since we're talking about this? I don't know how I got to start this rabbit hole, but share the experience you had in St. Louis with the McGwire Sosa, the challenging home run title there, going for that was incredible to grow up on.
Yeah, let me start by saying that even though the Blues won a Stanley Cup, and when the Rams were here, they went to a Super Bowl, played a couple of NFC championship games in town. The Cardinals, we had game 6 against Texas in 2011 when David Freese hit that home run. I've been at a lot of great events, but my favorite event of all time that I've been at was Mark McGwire hitting 62. And when the Cardinals got him in 97, he hit 24 home runs down the stretch after they got him from Oakland. And he signs down the stretch of that season. And the entire offseason was spent talking about McGwire breaking the record of Roger Maris. So it wasn't something that was just thrust upon us in July. Day 1 of the season against the Dodgers, sunny, perfect day in St. Louis, he hits a grand slam, first home run of the season. And then he takes off home runs in his first 4 games. And it was almost like it was a fait accompli that it was going to happen, but it was just so cool because it was must-see TV. The old Cardinal record had been 43 home runs in a season by Johnny Mize. And he broke that right after the All-Star break. And then just to see the consistency with which he hit home runs was unbelievable. And the fact that teams weren't necessarily pitching to him, it was kind of like Barry when Barry hit his 73. If he saw a pitch, he hit it out of the ballpark. He had more home runs than singles and doubles combined, McGwire did in 1998. It was just an unbelievable season. And then the anticipation of that night and when he did it, and then when he hit 69 and 70 on the last day of the season, even though the team didn't make the playoffs, it was really a memorable, great season.
I'll never forget it. I remember watching it. It was, if I remember correctly, it was a line drive, like bullet shot out of the stadium. Right. I'll never forget that. Going back to Barry for just 1 second, I'll never forget when Bobby Bonilla's contract was up the year before Barry's, and the Pirates went to Bonilla and they said, 4 years, $16 million. And Bonilla balked at it, went to the Mets. Bond says, if they offer me that today, I'm signing.
Yeah, right.
Think about that. Think about that kind of money back then.
Right. Isn't that amazing? And it's interesting because that was kind of like the beginning of the end for the Cardinal general manager at the time, Dal Maxfield, because he had promised the Cardinals were really close at that time. Joe Torre was their manager. And he'd promised Torre and the fans that he would go out and get a hitter. And Bobby was the logical guy. And the Cardinals had no interest in him at all. But boy, what a shame, that team didn't make it to a World Series. Andy Van Slyke still lives here in St. Louis. And we talk about that all the time, the Sid Bream play. And Barry was just such a dynamic player. And I think we all kind of knew, we didn't think it was going to be San Francisco, but we all kind of knew his time was going to be limited with the Pirates. It's a shame that they weren't able to do more with him, with Doug Drabeck, with Jim Leland at the helm. That was a really good team, and it's a shame they never made it to the World Series.
That was pre big money too. And once the big money came along and they got sold to Kevin McClatchy, that really changed the dynamics of that organization. And I'll give McClatchy credit for one thing and one thing only. He kept that team in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. He was part of that getting that stadium there. But you know, I don't even want to get into the Bob Nutting thing with you because it's so disheartening for all the people of Pittsburgh. Speaking on their behalf, he just keeps giving them the same story year after year. So we'll see if Cherington can do anything with them.
And we should note, by the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, Albert Pujols says the PNC ballpark is his favorite ballpark in baseball.
I don't doubt that. Have you ever been there?
I have not, but all the broadcasters I know, all the people I know with the Cardinals say it's a bucket list place to go. That the two best stadiums in the National League are Pittsburgh and San Francisco. I've been to San Fran, but I need to get to Pittsburgh's ballpark.
It's a nice city. I'll tell you that, not just because I grew up there many years, but I can tell you no matter where you sit, when you sit there, it opens up to the skyline of the city, and it really is a spectacular place to watch a game. So,
I came in with the Rams a couple of times for Steelers games, but I never got in there to be in that ballpark. I was at the old ballpark for baseball, but never at the new ballpark.
Yeah, the old school Super Bowl looking. Yeah. Hey, let me ask you this. Talk a little bit about Yadier Molina going into this year. Man, he's been around forever, and he is still so integral. Is he going to be the guy that still leads that team, or are they trying to get that leadership to come from some younger guys now? What do you expect from him going into this season?
He'll still lead by example. It was interesting. We were talking to Nolan Arenado a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I always try to be the first guy in, but every single morning, Yadi is here before me. Yadi's here before sunrise. And last year, he tested positive for COVID. He was asymptomatic, and he was jogging 4 hours or 4 miles a day. He was out getting himself in great shape. He's probably, at least from the looks of it, in better condition than he was when he came up in 2004. He's still great defensively. He's declined offensively. In each of his last 4 years, his OPS has gone down. But in terms of having a young group of pitchers and getting them through games, there's no better catcher in baseball for that. And that's why he'll be such a huge advantage for the Cardinals. And he does lead by example. He's not a media guy. He's not a guy that is going to be rah-rah in the clubhouse. And the Cardinals have some other guys, especially now with the addition of Arenado, that can handle that role and be more vocal in the clubhouse. But Yadi certainly is iconic here in St. Louis. Everybody wanted him to come back and finish his career here. And we all look at him here as a Hall of Famer. He's offensively, he's up in the upper echelon of every catcher that ever played the game. And you talk to people like Johnny Bench, says he's the best defensive catcher of all time. There's not many people around who disagree with the idea of Yadi being the best defensive catcher they've ever seen.
I honestly, growing up, I was a catcher. My son's a catcher. My daughter caught, and he is probably in my top 5 guys that I've ever watched and admired playing the game, to be quite honest with you. Thurman Munson, Johnny Bench, Yadier Molina, right there. Give me an opening day lineup. Tell me who's trotting out there, who's going to be on the mound.
All right. Well, Jack Flaherty is starting the opener for the Cardinals. My guess is that you'll have Tommy Edmond leading off. The way the Cardinals are going, I kind of think that they're going to hit Goldschmidt second, Arenado third, and then probably Paul DeJong fourth. And my guess would be Dylan Carlson will probably hit fifth. And then Molina sixth. Tyler O'Neill will be your left fielder and hit seventh. And the Cardinals just announced before our interview that Harrison Bader is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with an arm injury, a forearm injury. So you might have a situation where a kid who had a really good spring training named John Nagowski hits eighth and starts in left field, and then perhaps O'Neill in right with Dylan Carlson in center. I could definitely see that happening. Otherwise, another youngster by the name of Lane Thomas would get the nod in center field.
So they've got some good young prospects coming up through that pipeline, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, and especially in the outfield, they want to evaluate these guys. They've got 5 outfielders. They traded Dexter Fowler so that they could take a look at these young players and find out who can play. And they really don't have any more young outfielders on the immediate horizon. Their next ETA for an outfielder is probably the middle of 2022. So from among that group, Carlson is in, but Carlson, Bader, Thomas, O'Neill, Nagowski, and a lefty hitter by the name of Justin Williams. They're hoping that they can get enough production out of those guys. And Matt Carpenter's had an absolutely abysmal spring. As we speak, he's 1 for 30 on the spring. Wow. He's hitting 0-30, and there might be days where he plays second base against a soft-tossing right-hander, and then they could move Tommy Edmond to the outfield in that instance as well.
Will they move on from him? Do you think they'll try and put him out there and move on from him?
He's due $18.5 million this year, and then he's got an option, a $2 million buyout after the season. So I think for whatever reason, the Cardinals are going to bring him out of spring training, but I think he is going to have to produce during the regular season. I don't think the Cardinals are afraid of swallowing that salary, but I don't think they want to do it before the regular season starts.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Who would be the ideal matchup for the Cardinals heading into the playoffs?
That's a great question. I would have to think it's going to be whoever is representing the East. You don't want to play the Dodgers. You don't want to play the Padres. So I think the East is so wide open. I really think the one team that won last year from that division, won a playoff series, was Miami. I think they're the only team that can't win it. I think, well, I guess Philly's probably not going to as well. But Atlanta, the Mets, Washington, all exceptionally tough, but I think I'd rather face the best of those 3 than the Padres or the Dodgers.
Inevitably, you will have to get through one of those games
right.
to get to the World Series.
Yeah, I guess what you would hope, and maybe there's a Darvish injury or something like that you could get through the Padres. Cardinals didn't have any success with them in the playoffs last year, but somebody's got to beat the Dodgers because they have 9 legitimate starting pitchers. They have 9 starting pitchers that would be top 3 in every other rotation in baseball. It's just ridiculous.
They have the money to do it. You know,
yeah, they do.
They go out, they spend the money, they pay to win a championship, and you know, when they fall short, they just go right back in and figure it out from another angle with the money. As long as baseball's letting that go on, as you and I discussed a little bit ago, as long as baseball says that's okay to do, why not continue to do it, right?
But let's give them credit too, because they went out, they found a guy like Max Muncy, they've developed Gavin Lux, they developed Bellinger, they developed Steger,
sure.
Some of those starting pitchers, Gonsolin, May, Walker Buehler, Urias have come up through their system. So they've done a really good job of developing players too. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Betts contract was the first $100 million contract that Andrew Friedman had given out there. So even though they do have high salaries, they're paying a lot of their own guys, Kershaw primarily among them. And it's not like they've gone out and just overwhelmed everybody in free agency until they went out and got Bauer.
Sure. It's amazing with Kershaw too, because he's not even the marquee name there anymore.
Right.
To be honest with you. I mean, when I think of them, I don't think of Kershaw, first of all. 3 years ago, yeah. Today, not so much.
No, it's amazing.
Let's go ahead and move on a little bit and talk about the MLS. I know you had mentioned that early on. Tell me your level of excitement about it. I know were you a soccer fan before St. Louis got a team? You know, how's the city feel about it?
I watch some European soccer. I don't watch MLS, but St. Louis for many years was considered the soccer capital of the United States. That 1950 team that beat England in the World Cup, literally half the players and that 1950 World Cup team that the USA fielded or pitched was from St. Louis. And St. Louis University has still, at this date, won more NCAA championships than any other college has won. In the area, there was a year, 1973, where St. Louis U won the Division I championship. University of Missouri St. Louis won the Division II championship, and right across the river, Southern Illinois Carbondale won the Division III championship. So you had all 3 NCAA champions from our area, and they were loaded with St. Louis players. So people still remember that, and there's a significant amount of interest. It's kind of a shame that the league and St. Louis weren't able to get St. Louis a franchise earlier. There just wasn't that money because MLS wants billionaire owners, and we didn't have somebody that was interested in owning an MLS franchise. But since the inception of the league has wanted to be in St. Louis. Well, now they've got a group led by Carolyn Kindle Betts. It'll be one of the few female ownership led groups in pro sports. She's part of the Taylor family that owns Enterprise Leasing. They're going to own the franchise. They're building the stadium, and the level of excitement here is through the roof. They took a couple of months ago deposits on season tickets and sold over 100,000 for a 22,000 seat stadium. Wow. People are very, very excited. It is a great soccer town, and I'm excited about it. It'll be fun to have that sort of atmosphere. Soccer is different because you can go to a soccer game, not know anything about the sport, and have a great time because of the way the fans act and react. And so I'm really excited about that. And where the stadium is built, it's really going to add to what St. Louis is. If you've ever been to Broadway on Nashville, there's just a category of stores and shops right down one drive. And that's the way it'll be for Market Street here in St. Louis. You'll be able to walk from the soccer stadium from the west end of downtown all the way down to the Gateway Arch. And I think it'll really foster a lot of business here in St. Louis. So to give you a visual of this walk, you've got the soccer stadium, you walk past the renovated Union Station, you walk past the Enterprise Center where the Blues play, and then all the shops and restaurants, and then Busch Stadium, and then down to the Arch grounds. It'll be a pretty cool setup in downtown St. Louis when soccer is being played here.
It sounds like it's a quaint atmosphere too, which brings even more enhanced excitement when you get those people in there, kind of like almost like a hockey arena, to that degree.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And it'll be fun to, again, build rivalries with the Chicago franchise, with the Kansas City franchise. Nashville now has a team, and Blues fans love going to Nashville, all within driving distance. So that'll be fun too. That's
great. One final segment I do is called "We Just Got to Know." Okay. So you kind of shared a little bit with me some of the remarkable moments you had in sports. If I were to ask you to give me your top three, aside from the McGuire thing, what would be your top three moments in sports that you've encountered personally?
All right. There are a couple of football ones, interestingly. After McGuire, my favorite moment was the very first playoff football game ever played in St. Louis. And so we had the football Cardinals for 28 years. The Rams came here in 1995. Their first year, they were 7-5. Second year, 6-10. Third year, 5-11. Fourth year, 4-12. Then the fifth year, the greatest show on turf arrives, and they go to the Super Bowl. Very first playoff game in the NFL ever played in St. Louis. Very first offensive play, Kurt Warner hits Isaac Bruce for a 77-yard touchdown. Unbelievable. And the place exploded. And along those same lines, when Kurt Warner hit Ricky Prohl to win the NFC Championship the following week, it was unbelievable. And then even though they did it on the road, I literally waited my entire life for the Blues to win a Stanley Cup. They came into the league with the Penguins, and it never won until 2 years ago. And so when the Blues won the Stanley Cup, that was right there at the top of my list too.
I got to tell you, it warms my heart to know that you're a hockey guy deep down inside. I can see that.
No doubt.
I can see that.
And hey, we're kindred spirits because we're the second six. And you think about it, the Penguins have won multiple cups. The Kings won multiple cups. The Stars won a cup under Ken Hitchcock. Yep. Obviously, the Seals went away. And then even early on, the Broad Street Bullies, the Flyers, won their cups when they were patterned after the Blues. That rough and tough Blues team. Heck, the scene from Slapshot where the players went up in the stands, that was based on a Blues Flyers game where a bunch of Blues players got arrested. So all those other second six franchises, except for the Seals, who went out of business, had won cups until the Blues did. So we were kind of the last of the group to join you.
It's just, like I said, it's an amazing sport. Everything going on out there in St. Louis sounds so fantastic, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. If you want to hear more from Randy, you could probably listen to him on radio.com maybe, or
we're anywhere you find a podcast, you can find us, or at our website 101ESPN.com. We put the podcast. Michelle Smallmon and I do our show from 7 to 10 in the morning, and you can listen live if you want, 7 to 10 Central, or find us anywhere you find your podcast. It's Karraker and Smallmon.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Original Sports Podcast with Mark Maraday. Good luck with your hockey playoffs and going into the baseball season. I'm sure you guys are going to have a great summer.
Mark, thanks. Have a great time yourself. I appreciate it. Good to be on your show with you.
Thank you.
Heroes, warriors who played for the glory. We're about to see it in your stadium chair. We know all your teams and we can go on for days. It's game time from the original. Highlights and playoffs and very special guests. It's game time on the original Sportscast show by the best.